I don't think the leader of the synagogue, when she came in, I don't think he or the Hazan, the singer, would have ever noticed that she was there. She probably didn't tithe well. She's been over, she's crooked, she can't get a job, she probably doesn't have a lot of money, not a big tither. I tell you what, if you come in, you're hurting and you're a good tither, you have money, you'll find compassion. And when that happens, you know that the person doesn't have compassion. He wouldn't have noticed her. But the Lord picked her up. He's full of compassion for those who hurt. He's full of compassion for those who have been neglected. They've been abused for years. And he looks at her and calls her forward. And please understand, she didn't have any faith. That's not what it says. She wasn't pleading to him. She didn't come forward to him and said, you know, I need to be healed. Heal me. He didn't charge her $25 or $50 or whatever. He calls on her and he motions to her, says, come forward. I'm going to be just really nasty here and just tell you, watch this in one of these churches that does the healing. See if they call somebody forward that's all bent over. See what happens. I have a couple here, and I don't want to confuse them with some of the stuff that goes on in some of these churches, but it's a couple I've known for years, and she has prayed for me and prayed for me, and every time I run into her, she comes up and lays hands on me and prays for my back. She finally gave up a couple of years ago. She said, it just doesn't, your faith is not enough. I said, I don't think it's my faith. I think it's God has a plan for me to do, and he restricts me in certain areas so that I'll go into the areas I should be in. And Christ is full of compassion for her. In fact, it's interesting, Christ is full of compassion for a lot of the women. Jewish culture at this time, it was hard to get compassion for a woman. They were pretty much geared towards the house, the babies, and whatever else. But if you'll watch, Christ has the time to speak to them, to heal them, deal with them. And by the way, if you'll take a look, you know who supports him? A woman by the name of Shoshana, wife of Herod's steward. There's a whole group of them that are there. Mary Magdalene, as we would call her, she's not a poor woman. In fact, there's not much in there that actually says she's a woman that's of low morality, although I would suspect that, but she's also wealthy. And she supports him. She takes care of him. And Christ is not doing it for that. I have one thing to say here, though. A ministry does not continue and do the things it needs to do without the money to support it. And Jesus put his time and so forth with the 12. But he wasn't above meeting those who needed a tender touch. When the children came to Christ and wanted a blessing, the apostles said what? Get away, you don't have time for them. And Christ said what? You bring them to me. Put them on my lap. I'll bless them. And if you don't become as a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Meaning simple faith. Simple faith. You ever seen a child when they're playing and they really get into it? And they get so much into it, they've got such, they are really living it. It's something that they can believe in. They have a simple faith, and we need to have a simple faith like that often in Christ. Dead religion is joyless and angry. Dead religion is joyless and angry. But you know what? When you have reality with God, you're going to have joy. I didn't say happiness. I said joy. There's a difference. Happiness is something that you get when the circumstances are good. Joy is something that you get because it's given to you by God. It's something which is passed down to you. And regardless of the circumstances that you're in, you can have joy. If you want a book to read, and it's by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. If you want a book to read about that, his book is excellent. But the end of it was not written by Bonhoeffer. Instead, it was written by a man who knew that he died by being hung by Hitler's regime. He was against Hitler, had been. He was one of the few pastors who did that all the way through. But you know, sometimes we see pastors who are angry and they're vicious when they preach. They rip people to pieces. It's not as common anymore, but it used to be just something that was so common, it would drive you away. And this synagogue official is like that. He gets angry. I mean, he gets angry. He says to them, you know what? You can get healed 6 days a week, but on the seventh, we don't heal. And Christ says to him very simply, wait a minute, you take your ox out to get water. You take your horse out to water it. You take your cattle out to feed them. You do all those things on the Sabbath. What's wrong with the water of life for this woman on the Sabbath? For the bread of life for this woman on the Sabbath? And everything would tie to her. Something is different. One man tells a story about going to a wedding, and this has not been uncommon. But he was doing the wedding, but he was doing it in somebody else's church. And somebody from that church had to be on the platform and be a part of the wedding party while it was going on. So the pastor took it. There was 2 pastors standing there. When he went in the office, he noticed the guy was a chain smoker. The pastor was a chain smoker. He went out on the platform, and in the middle of it, somebody in the front row stood up and took a picture. And this pastor just ripped him. Now, I don't like pictures taken during the ceremony. Now, we do a lot of video now, and you never know what's going on. You don't see them and so forth. But it used to be, you had to be kind of restrictive on it, because I'd have people who would literally get up out of the chair, walk up here behind me, and take pictures of what was going on. And kind of detrimental to everything. But in this case, he just said, we don't take pictures during the ceremony. They're not allowed. Sit down. What's that do to the ceremony?
Those are worse than the pictures.
It gets really hard to recover from that. And that's kind of what this leader of the synagogue did. The only problem with it is the rest of the synagogue, when Christ answers back and talks to them, the rest of the synagogue, and I think the rabbi did the same, begin to glorify God. Dead religion is hypocritical. It's hypocritical. You know, the reality of the Lord is it's truthful, it's genuine. Synagogues tend to be very hypocritical. I mentioned the smoking a minute ago, but you go in most rabbis' homes or into the synagogue itself, into their office. They smoke, they drink. They're not known necessarily for their, what's a good way of putting this? For their moral touch. Very hypocritical. And they come up with a set of rules that apply to people. Not necessarily to them, but to the people. In this particular case, truly, living religion is not going to be hypocritical. It's going to be open. It's not going to be concerned necessarily with somebody violating some of the small rules. And we can fall into that very easily. You know, one man says that we can be gun barrel straight on our doctrine. But if it's not applied with compassion, if it's not applied with love, it doesn't mean a thing. It's like the guy that he hated to have the shelves of his store. He owned a store in a small town. He said he hated to have the shelves messed up. And he would constantly go back and straighten them up. I used to work in downtown El Paso, and that was something that I had to get used to at first, because you come up with a display counter and you set this thing up, and the women would come in and just mess this thing up in 10 seconds. I mean, it was just done. I'd go back and straighten it up, and the boss went to me. It came to me about the second day, said, don't worry about that. They like it that way. Leave it alone. You know, this fellow owned a store, got to the point where he would close the store down, straighten out the shelves, and let people back in. What he forgot was, the whole process was to what? Sell it. Yep, it'll be messy. It will be. But you need to understand the same thing's true in the church. Our job is to deal with people. And this would be a great job if it wasn't for the people. But that's not the way it works out. The Lord's Day is there to worship. And it's also, in this particular case, for Christ to heal. Don't get focused on the rules so much that we neglect the main point that we're here to see people won to Christ. I've had people come in that were dressed so poorly. I think the ultimate illustration has always been a man that I led to the Lord in his home. The guy had more cats than I've ever seen in a home in my life. And the place stunk. He was a Hell's Angel member. He dressed like it. He had the tattoos. He'd been in jail several times. I had 2 teenage girls with me, and I was scared to death. But he did get saved. I'm going to tell you what, the next Wednesday night, he was standing at the back, and I came in the door here. He came up to me and grabbed me and gave me a great big hug, and I had no idea who he was. I didn't have a clue. He had a sports jacket on, dress slacks, a tie, cut hair, shaved beard, or trimmed beard. And I'm looking at him, he said, Berg, it's me, Freddie. And I'm kind of like, whoa, it changed. Everything changed. Not just on the outside, it changed here, which changes the outside. And dead religion promotes the wrong priorities. It really